Hey guys, Mr. Wilhelm here. Today we are going to talk about ecology and biodiversity. Within this particular PowerPoint, we're going to have lots of new terms and definitions, so you need to make sure that you pay attention to the explanation of those terms and definitions. Also, I'm going to be skipping over certain portions of the PowerPoint that you can read for yourself and do more explanation of other parts, and hopefully to speed up the PowerPoint for you and make the video just a little bit shorter, just like you guys requested. Okay, so let's first take a look at the term ecology. Ecology is the study of relationships between all organisms and their environment. Now, if we look at this word ecology, we find this particular word, eco, which means environment, and then we have ology, which is the study. So it's the study of an environment and those organisms within that environment. And you're going to see as we go, if we break down the word and look at the other words that are contained, we can easily identify what that word means. And we'll look at that in a couple of other examples throughout this PowerPoint. Here's another example, biosphere. Bio means life. And we see that time and time again. Bio means life. Sphere, obviously a round circular object. In this case, we're talking about the planet. Now, the biosphere is the area of the planet where organisms live. So that is the very top, very outermost layer of the earth. We have water, land, and air. We have birds in the air, obviously organisms, fish, and other mammals in the water, and then all sorts of plants and animals on land. So the biosphere is the outermost layer of the crust, and that is where we have living organisms. Bio, life, sphere, circular, okay, spherical area where we have organisms living. Biomes. Again, we have that bio word. Biomes, okay, it's the homes of living things. It's the part of the biosphere. And we divide the biosphere into these major categories or communities, and they're classified based upon the vegetation and the adaptations of organisms, climate, and so forth. You can see down here at the bottom we have a grassland type biome with the zebras. Okay, we have a desert type biome with the cactus, and then we got a tropical rainforest biome with the water and lots of vegetation. And each one of these biomes, they're characterized by their temperature and how much precipitation and the types of plants and animals that live there, and they're broken down based upon those categories. Okay, more about biomes. Each biome is supported by different organisms that are adapted to live in that biome. Okay, we have penguins. Penguins have adapted to live in a very cold biome. Okay, where there's lots of ice and snow. We might find this in more of a tundra type biome. Okay, they have a very thick layer of fat and can withstand the cold temperatures in that biome. Versus monkeys, we'd find in more of a tropical rainforest type biome, lots of trees, so they can live in those trees and swing from tree to tree and so forth. So you have organisms that are adapted. They have certain characteristics. They have certain characteristics that allow them to live in that biome and reproduce and create offspring successfully. Now, some biomes that are more obvious or more dominant. Okay, we have forest biomes. Okay, which are coniferous, deciduous, and rainforest. Coniferous forests are like the forest with the evergreens. Deciduous forest is kind of forest you'd find around here or in East Texas. And a rainforest is going to be like a tropical rainforest that you find near the equator. Okay. Grasslands. If we go out into central Texas, we have lots of grasslands in central Texas, dominated by grasses, smaller trees, smaller shrubs. Okay. Kind of not terribly hot, but not cool either. Okay. A little bit drier. Desert, obviously being very dry, rocky, sandy soil. Very few plants and animals. Taiga and tundra, also being biomes. that we find. These are all terrestrial biomes, also known as land biomes. Terrestrial, you'll see that again. We're talking about terrestrial planets. Those are planets that have a solid rocky um, foundation to them. Okay, these are terrestrial biomes or land biomes. Now, other types of biomes, aquatic biomes, you have freshwater lakes, ponds, and rivers. You have different types of animals that live in those biomes and are associated with those biomes. And it doesn't necessarily have to be just fish. It could be all of the land animals that live around lakes and rivers and so forth. Okay, saltwater oceans. Obviously, we have the oceans and all of the mammals and fish that live within the oceans. And then brackish water wetlands. Brackish water. Brackish water is an area of that is kind of halfway between fresh water, which is no salt, and then obviously salt water, which is salt. Brackish water is kind of halfway between that. Kind of salty, but not as salty as an ocean. Okay, and those are all water biomes or aquatic biomes. Okay, now biomes, life, is organized into these four levels. Okay, the largest, most broad level, okay, is called an ecosystem. So we would have the North American ecosystem. That would be all of the plants and animals that live in North America. Now that's different from obviously the African ecosystem, but it's a very, very large area. If we start getting more specific within that large ecosystem, and you can see how I have my arrow here, large up here at the top, and as we go down, it gets more narrow. We have a community, okay, that is not as wide, as broad as an ecosystem, but still fairly large. We'd have, a community, for example, that might be something like the state of Texas, okay? And then you have a population. Those are members that live within that community. Okay, so you got the state of Texas, and you'd have coyotes, for example. And then you'd also have bobcats, and you'd have rabbits and squirrels. Those would all be a community, or excuse me, a population within this area. Okay. Then we come down to organisms. Okay. Organisms are the most specific part of an ecosystem. You'd have the individual organism, whether that is a squirrel or squirrels or rabbits, okay, or coyotes. Okay, habitat versus niche. And that word right there, N-I-C-H-E, is pronounced niche, not niche, okay, or niche. It is niche. Okay, a habitat is a place where an organism lives. And then a niche is the job that that organism has within that habitat. And each organism has a job within its habitat, okay, to either produce food or to eat another organism. For examples, you have frogs. Frogs eat grasshoppers. If we didn't have frogs eat grasshoppers, we'd have an overabundance of grasshoppers. So that's that frog's job. His job is to eat grasshoppers. Okay. And then we also have snakes. Snakes have a job. They eat other spiders and insects, and they eat frogs. So we don't have an overabundance of frogs. Okay. So we have each organism has a niche for its particular habitat, okay, within its ecosystem. Now, we have two major components in the ecosystem. We have non-living components. Those are called abiotic factors. A, A means non, abiotic. Biotic means living, so non-living. That would be sunlight, rocks, land, temperature. Those are all the little different characteristics within that particular ecosystem that are not alive. Okay, sun's not alive, light is not alive, wind is not alive, temperature, water, rocks. Those are all non-living things. Those are abiotic factors. Opposite of that are the living components of the ecosystem. Those are easier to identify. Those are all your plants and animals, okay, including bacteria and so forth. And those are called biotic factors, okay? So we have biotic right here, which is living. And then you have abiotic, and that is non-living. If you could simply connect that A to the non, okay, that help you remember the difference between abiotic and biotic. Okay, so abiotic, non-living, biotic, living. Now, here's a couple of different biotic factors and terms that you need to be familiar with. We have a producer. A producer is something that can create its own energy and produces food for others. Those are basically plants. Plants can take the sunlight, as we learned, and go through the process of photosynthesis to create their own food. Okay, they can produce their own food. Consumers are animals. Consumers are organisms that cannot produce their own food. They have to consume. They have to eat. They have to eat in order to get energy. Now, consumers can be categorized into either being a herbivore or omnivore. Okay. Herbivore, herbs, means they eat plants. Okay. Carnivore means they eat meat or other animals. And then one we don't have up here, which is omnivore. Omnivore means they are both. Okay. Humans are omnivores. We eat plants and we eat animals versus others like a lion, okay, or a wolf. They eat primarily other animals. They eat meat. Okay. Autotroph and heterotroph. Autotroph is kind of like a producer. Auto, makes its own, automatic, okay, can make its own food. Versus a heterotroph is like a consumer, okay? Heterotroph cannot produce its own food, it has to consume. So those words are synonymous with each other, okay? Autotroph is synonymous with producer, heterotroph is synonymous with consumer. Now, interactions with biotic factors. Remember biotic. Biotic, we talked about this. Biotic means living, okay? So living factors. So how living factors interact. We have two major categories within that definition. We have predators and prey, okay? Predators are obviously the ones doing the hunting, and prey are the ones that are getting hunted, okay? Predators are doing the eating. Prey are being eaten. So in this picture, I have the lion. The lion would be the predator, and the zebra would be the prey. Okay. Some more examples of interactions between biotic factors. Biotic meaning living. And again, you see that word bio, living. If we add that A up there, the A means the opposite of abiotic. Okay. We're going to talk about asexual in just a minute. Asexual is the opposite of sexual. You have that A in there. It means opposite of. But anyway, interactions of biotic factors. Here we have a process called symbiosis. Okay. Symbiosis is simply how two living factors interact over a long-term basis, how they sometimes work together or how they live together or live off of each other. Okay. We have three major types of symbiosis. Okay. First one is called mutualism. Mutual. Mutual. Mutualism. We have that first part, mutual. That means they both get along with each other. In this case, they both benefit from the situation. This is kind of like Nemo and having the his symbiotic relationship with the anemone. I almost blanked out right there. Couldn't think of the word. The anemone. So you got Nemo and the anemone. Well, Nemo benefits from the anemone because he gets protection from the anemone. And then the anemone benefits from Nemo because fish and other predators are drawn in to eat Nemo, and the anemone stings them, and therefore the anemone gets food. So they both benefit from the situation, from that situation there. So that's called mutualism. Okay. Now, commensalism. Commensalism is a type of situation where one benefits, okay, where one of the benefits and the other doesn't benefit, but it's not harmed. Okay. There's a lot of times you'll see, if you're watching any type of show where you have a shark and the shark's swimming along and it's got these little sucker fish attached to the bottom of the shark. Okay. And those little sucker fish are basically trying to hitch a free ride. Okay. And they also clean the bacteria that are on that shark. Well, the suckerfish really, the shark's not really being harmed. He's really not getting anything out of the deal, but he's not being harmed. On the other hand, the suckerfish are getting a free little ride. They attach themselves to the shark, and then they can don't have to swim as fast or as hard. They can just go for a ride on the back of that shark or the belly of that shark. So that's called commensalism. Okay, commensalism. And then lastly, we have parasitism. Now, parasitism, if you look at this root word, you can probably figure that out. That's parasite, okay? Parasite. Now, that is where one organism benefits and the other organism is harmed, okay? Um, Worms, for example. I know it kind of sounds gross, but a lot of dogs and other animals will get worms. They get these worms from picking them up off the ground, maybe as eggs or whatever, and they eat them or it's within their food. Those worms get down inside their intestines. The worms start to grow and they start to live off of the food, the nutrients that the dog or animal is eating. And then in turn, the dog does not get those nutrients and the dog starts to lose weight and get sick. Okay, that's a parasite. A tick, okay, a tick attaches itself to an animal and obviously draws in the blood of that animal. Okay, that's a parasite. Around the holidays, you have holly. Holly is kind of a plant, okay, and traditionally, you see it around Christmas time or whatever, around the holidays. The holly is a parasite to trees. It attaches itself to other trees and lives off of the nutrients from another tree. Those are all examples of parasites. Now, biodiversity. Biodiversity. Bio means life, and then diversity means different. So it's different forms of life within an area. Okay, biodiversity. It's the number and variety of organisms in a specific area. Okay, biodiversity. Now, more biodiversity means the environment is more sustainable. The greater the biodiversity, it means it's more likely to survive and be able to survive disasters, forest fires, earthquakes, floods. Greater biodiversity means that the species within that area are going to be able to survive over a longer period of time in more dramatic environments. Okay, so biodiversity, greater biodiversity means that it's going to be more sustainable. It's going to last longer versus less biodiversity, which we're going to look at here in just a second. Okay. Now, sexual versus asexual reproduction. We've talked about that before, so that should be a review for you. Um, in sexual reproduction, you have a variety of species versus asexual reproduction. There's not. Remember, sexual reproduction comes from two parents, and the offspring are different from their parents, versus asexual, the offspring come from one parent, and the offspring are identical to that parent. Um, in biodiversity, we want sexual reproduction because there's a greater variety of life. And remember, greater variety of life, more sustainable, okay, more likely that environment and that life is to survive within that environment. Now, I'm going to pause here. I'm going to let you read this example of the Mount St. Helens Gopher. Kind of talks about biodiversity and the positive aspects of biodiversity. Okay, so in this situation, you have the gopher, and because he was able to adapt, and because there's greater biodiversity after this particular volcanic eruption, he was able to survive, and he was able to pass on his positive adaptations to his offspring. Again, creating greater biodiversity, more sustainable of life, able to withstand catastrophic events. So here we have our dangers of being limited biodiversity. Okay, a tundra, for example, is a very, very fragile environment. It's fragile because there is very little biodiversity. There's very little plant life. Therefore, there are very little animals and consumers. Okay, there's not very much life. If a great uh, disaster, a great catastrophe comes along, melting of glaciers, flood, warming, and things start to die, they're not going to have the ability to come back and grow again. They're not going to be able to survive. Okay, limited numbers means that they die, less likely to come back. Right here, limited, the word limited right here is your keyword for your bonus question on your quiz. So those of you that have been listening to the video and be listening to my narration, limited is the key word for the bonus question on your quiz. Limited.